Okay, so continuing, I don't want the videos to be too long, so I will shorten them and then upload them later. Continuing on that note, so how are laws passed in the federal political system? So now that we just kind of briefly learned about the way the government works and functions, and you'll have questions in your notes associated with that to help you learn more in depth. And again, you're going to need to know this stuff for your tests. Okay, you're going to need to know this stuff for your PAT, for your chapter test as well. So please spend the class time wisely after we're done the notes, and make sure you are finishing those questions. Okay. So the first thing that is done is, you know, somebody has an idea. So a particular idea. At some point, somebody had the idea that, well, smoking shouldn't be allowed indoors. Okay, so they presented it as a bill. You know, they presented their idea, they wrote it down formally, and they presented it to the government that we should not have smoking indoors. And maybe they provided certain reasons, right? Maybe they had scientific reasons, like, well, you know, if three of us were smoking a cigarette in this room, it's gonna impact everyone's lungs, right? And that's harmful, and maybe you don't want that harm. And so that law turns into a bill. It's presented to the House of Commons by a cabinet minister, and then the different levels of government look at that law. Okay. You'll have this more in detail in your textbook, and your questions will ask you to read those pages. Maybe we could read those together, we'll see. There are 3 readings during which members in the House of Commons debate, then vote on the finalized bill. Okay, so what should I add about that? Now, obviously, it should be noted that it's not as if they do all 3 readings on the same day. You know, sometimes they let time pass, and the reason for that, the importance for that, is because, you know, sometimes you read something and you feel about it a certain way. Now, if you're in the political system, maybe you go to your constituents and you start talking to them, and you get an idea from your community of what they think about it, what suggestions they have. You come back, you read it again, and you have a different perspective, and you look at it a little bit differently, and then you go back to your community. Hopefully, if you're doing this thing well, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that all the politicians do their job well, and most people, for that matter, don't do their job very well. What? But I'm recording. I'm recording. But after the second reading, then maybe you go back to your community, and again, you have new ideas from other people in the the House of Commons and your community, and then you start to continue to develop your understanding of this law, right? And so with our little interruption there, so sometimes, particularly with the current event project, so the first time I did it, I was very strongly pursuing this idea that, well, my students should get comfortable and feel confident presenting in front of their peers, right? Because at least you guys know each other, right? Like, how many of you have given a job interview? Just raise your hand, right? And for those of you who have, and those of you who work or have dealt with the public, you know, it can be very scary at times dealing with strangers. It's very, like, you don't know what they're going to do, right? And so for me, I'm trying to work on that skill in my classroom. But, you know, Miss Rantucci, she came in one day and she asked, well, the kids who are not doing this assignment because they're scared to present to the class, why don't you just have them bring 2 or 3 friends at lunchtime, right? And so the more I do this assignment, the more I understand what it is, what I want, and how to better do that, right? And so the 3 readings can kind of work the same way. The longer you look at this problem, the more information you can gather, the different perspectives you can include, and the better equipped you are to answer the question or the problem, right? And so, you know, same reason why you should look at your notes 2 or 3 times before you take your test, so that you better understand the material. And don't look at it all 3 times in the same night, because, you know, your brain needs time to digest and process information. Anyways, once it goes from the House of Commons, it goes to the Senate, and the Senate does have the power to block this bill from becoming law, but it doesn't usually do that, right? And, you know, you can spend a lot of time reading about why that is or isn't. I'll leave that up to you. Last but not least, it then goes to the Governor General, who is the representative of the British monarch, right? The Queen or King, kind of the representative of England in Canada. and that person gives their royal assent, and then it becomes law, right? Okay, so we'll move on. Here's just a little image of what that looks like. So you have the first reading, the bill is considered read for the first time and is printed. Second reading, the members debate the bill's principles. So they're going to talk about, well, why do we want this law? So coming back to the example of if you have, like the no smoking law. So they might ask, well, why do we as Canadians want this law? Do Canadians want this law? What is the benefit? What is the harm, right? And for many people nowadays, it's a no-brainer, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever walked by someone smoking a cigarette. I mean, I don't have a sense of smell, but I can taste it. It's like, it's bad. It's not fun, right? So imagine if people are just smoking nonstop in rooms. Now, fun fact, apparently, I don't know if I should say this on camera, but apparently way back in the day, like way back, like well before you were born, maybe before your parents even met, apparently staff members would smoke in the staff room all the time. So, things change over time. And so you'll have this debate of what is the principle? What is the purpose of this law? Why do we want it? What is it going to do? Right? You have the committee stage where committee members study the bill clause by clause. So just like section by section, they look at all the points of how it's going to work. You have the report stage, so members can make other amendments. Right? So maybe you think like, hey, well, actually, so if we're trying to protect air quality inside rooms, well, how about not being able to smoke beside doorways and near entrances to shops, right? Because maybe that'll affect who comes in and who doesn't, because you don't want to pass by someone smoking, right? And that's a very common law. So they can make an amendment, and then maybe they start doing the process again. Goes over to the third reading where members debate and then they vote on the bill, yes or no, whether or not they want that as it is, right? So you can't say, hey, I like 5 articles in this bill, but I don't like the other 3. Right? So either you vote yes or no. You have to accept the whole law or deny the whole law. Right? That's when it gets to the vote. That period here is for when you make amendments. So if there's 5 out of 8 things that you like, 3 things you don't like, here is the time for you to raise your voice and to advocate for why that should be changed. And that's very true of life. It's better to advocate sooner rather than later. Goes to the Senate, goes to the royal assent. Typically, both these groups say yes. The royal assent is symbolic, so it's not really going to be a no. Right? I don't even know of a case where the Governor General said no. Okay, now we have the judicial branch. So the judicial branch is kind of separate, and they are there to maintain a certain balance of power within these branches, right? So you don't want one group doing too much and overextending themselves, right? The judicial branch, as you can see, these people, they almost look like they're dressed as Santas, right? But they're not. Okay, they're very experienced judges who have served in Canada and for Canada for some time. The judicial branch also consists of Canada's courts, but one of their main job is to interpret laws made by the legislative branch to ensure the rights of Canadians are protected, right? Again, those rights that they're referring to are in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I promise you I'll sort out getting each and every one of you a copy that looks nice and clean like mine back there. But they're making sure that, hey, so coming back to that smoking example, what right do Canadian citizens have to smoke? And the answer to that question might be, well, they have every right. It's their body, it's their choice, it's their life, it's their money. Then you look at a little deviation of that. Well, what right do they have to smoke in front of people who don't want to smoke or who don't want to be around that, right? So, my high school social studies teacher always used to say this thing. He said, what did he say? The rights of my fist end at the tip of your nose. Right, so, I can extend only this far. Okay, I can't go any further. And so, if I'm smoking, I might say, oh, it's my right to be able to smoke. I'm free to do that. But the smoke goes out everywhere. And so, for the students who are in front of me, like, they're going to be the most impacted. Do I have a right to do that? Probably not, right? That's maybe up to the judicial branch of the government to decide. It's like, okay, well, you have the right to smoke, but you don't have the right to pollute everyone else's air. And so maybe you need to go to a designated area to do that with other people who would like to extend that right. Does that make sense? Right? So the same thing is that, you actually you don't have a right to drive a car. It's a privilege, right? Because you have to get a license first. But once you're licensed, you have the right to operate your vehicle, but you don't have the right to operate it while you're intoxicated, right? On whatever that is, right? You don't have the right to just do whatever you want. Like you can't just say, hey, this lane is full, I'll just go into the oncoming lane and drive against the flow of traffic, right? You can't do that. There's laws there. And so the judicial branch decides what does and doesn't go against the rights of Canadians. And they're also aiming to look at the entire, like not just the rights of the individual, but also the rights of the group. Okay. Hopefully that wasn't too boring. Now, shifting over from laws, well, what is the role of political parties? And maybe it'd be better to do this sooner rather than later. But each political party represents particular political views and beliefs, right? So let's look at that in a more simpler, so you have the NHL, right? Most of you should be aware of the NHL. I don't know how many of you watch. I don't watch the NHL myself, but hopefully you can understand the concept of a team and a coach. And so each team, each coach is going to have its own philosophy, right? So one coach might think that, hey, you got to work your athletes hard every single practice. Another coach might think, no, you should be kind to your athletes and you should work on skills. One coach might think that, hey, everyone should be at practice and they should all be participating in the same drill, same activity. Another coach might say, no, we need certain amount of time for the whole team, and then we need certain amount of time for each section of the team to work on specific skills. Right? Anyone here play football? No? Okay. So football does this quite well because you have such different positions. And when I say football, I mean like NFL, like throwing it. Right?
Can I have Wilmadale to room 158, please? Wilmadale to room 158.
So in football, they have several coaches, and each of these coaches is going to have a different philosophy. So political parties are no different. So typically, political parties on the left of the political spectrum, so that would be like the Liberal Party, they believe more in kind of intervening into the lives of citizens. So providing social programs, providing relief, providing benefits, all that kind of stuff. Whereas the Conservative Party is more on the right side of the political spectrum. They might believe more in the responsibility of the individual. Right? So rather than the government giving you money, instead you should focus on learning how to manage your money better so that you have some. You should focus on gaining new skills so that you can get paid more, right? Now, kind of on the older style of the political right, you have classical liberalism, which is more of a grade 12 thing. But they believe more so that the government shouldn't intervene at all. The government should only make sure to make sure that your rights are protected and that we're not being invaded by another country, right? Otherwise, it shouldn't interfere in the lives of the citizen, right? You have the Green Party. Their philosophy is related to the environment and protecting the environment. And so the rules and laws that they might present are aimed towards protecting the environment because that's what they believe, right? And the NDP started off as a party that was for the working class person, right? People who work everyday regular jobs. How do you protect them? How do you protect their rights? How do you make sure that their needs are being met and heard, right? And so think of these political parties as different teams with different coaches, and that coach has a different philosophy and they're all trying to do something a little bit different than the others. Hopefully the philosophy that governs all of the political parties is that they're trying to do the best thing they can for the citizen, for the individual, for you, right? And for the country, right? Hopefully. Key word there, so those philosophies, ideas, values, that's referred to their platform, okay? So hopefully that word makes a bit more sense. We've already talked about the independent political parties earlier. So some people say that, the media, some critics say that the media is the fourth branch of the government, that particularly if you have state-run media, so that means that it's funded by the government, that they are going to put out messages in support of the government that funds them. But they're not going to criticize them, which to an extent could be a problem in Canada. So are any of you aware of the CBC News? Most of you kind of have heard of it. So the CBC News is funded by the government, right? It's a government entity. And so particularly over the last 3 to 4 years, they've come under a lot of criticism of the money that the Liberal Party has given to them and the way they report certain political issues, right? But ideally, hopefully you have a media, news agency that reports on these issues fairly, right? So that would be like in your life, that would be like, you know, let's say you and someone else at the school, you get into trouble, right? So you get sent to the principal's office. Now imagine you get told that you're suspended because the other person told the story that you hit them, you were bullying them, and you were being mean to them. So the school suspends you. Does that seem fair? Not really, right? Now let's say they go up to you and they ask you what happened. You know, and you say, hey, well, you know, I've always had an issue with this person, and they were doing something that upset me, and so I hit them, and you know, I feel really bad about it, but I was really frustrated no one was doing anything. And the principal looks at you and goes, oh, you poor child, what should we do? And you say, you know what, I think we should get rid of that kid. Like send them to the comp. Or better yet, just send them to the field. Okay, make them work. And the principal goes, hey, you know what, that's a really good idea, let's do that. And they bring the other kid in and say, hey, you're a terrible person, you're going to the comp. Does that seem fair? Not really, right? But maybe you'd prefer that because you get to have what you want. Okay. Now the most fair thing, and this happened to me, I used to get into a lot of trouble when I was in school, is, you know, the principal brings you in and they ask you to write down what happened. And they give you a couple pieces of paper, you write down, and they do the same with the other kid, and the principal takes the time to read the story, and then they bring you in, they say, well, tell me what happened now. If they're smart, they'll do both, right? Because they want to know if the story aligns, right? And then you tell them what happened, and then the other kid tells them what happens, and maybe they ask you at the end of that, well, what are some solutions? Right? And so you give a couple of solutions, and they ask the other student as well. And then based on that, the principal makes a decision, right? Maybe they try to bring you two together and say, hey, listen, so this is what you wrote, this is what you wrote. Like, it seems like your problem is, you know, X, Y, Z, whatever it is. Does that seem more fair? You know, you get a little bit of both sides of the issue, right? So hopefully the media does the same thing. It tries to take the entire issue, not just one perspective, tries to look at multiple angles to the problem, right? And obviously, you know, that's an ideal, right? And people fall short of ideals all the time. So, you know, there's that. Okay, I think this is one of the last slides. But you also have lobby groups. And so, yeah, this should be the last slide, which is good because my video is almost at 20 minutes. Lobby groups are essentially, so similar to a political party, a lobby group has a particular belief, philosophy, or a goal. Right, so has anyone heard of Mothers Against Drunk Driving? MAD, right? Some of us have. There might be other new things with vaping and whatever now. But MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, was a very popular group. I don't know if they were particularly a lobby group, but they were a group that would go around in schools and support funding to educate young people about the harm that comes with driving while drunk, right? And so, you know, you can create a group that has a particular belief and you lobby the government. You go to the government, you go to your officials, and you essentially ask them, you convince them to make laws that help to solve a particular problem. So whether it's drunk driving, it could be vaping, it could be like cell phone issues, it could be, you know, violence in school. So, you know, this works in all levels. So it can go up to the government level where you're trying to change something in the entire country, or it could be even at the local level. So I remember reading this story in the news that there was a school in America, a particular school, that they had like 24 fights in the first month, and they had like 10 people get suspended or expelled, and like a couple kids got pretty badly beat up. And so, you know, they needed help, so they asked the community for suggestions, and they said, we basically need more help with supervision. We need more of a presence in the hallways. And a group of dads got together and created, I forget what they called it, but they created a group of dads, neighborhood dads, who would go to the school and monitor the hallways, create relationships with students, and address problems. And within a month or two, you know, they just saw a dramatic decrease in the violent events at the school. And so lobby groups work the same way. Slightly different though, because they're not necessarily always grassroots coming from the bottom up. Sometimes a lobby group will go straight to the government and say top down, like, hey, we want you to change the law, so everyone has to do this. And that also relates to the different political philosophies, right? So something on the left, on the liberal side, might be more of a top down where the government makes a change and everybody has to follow. Whereas the conservative side might say something more like, well, the individual should be better, they should change, and then that will change the whole system going up. Okay, that's something you learn more about in grade 12. Okay, I think that is the last slide. Oh, there's some photos here. There's always lobby groups against the tar sands in northern Alberta and against like oil and gas production all the time. I don't know what this bridge one is, something about the environment. There's always environmental lobby groups as well. And all of these people are trying to make sure that what their belief system is represented in the legal structure of the country. Okay, thank you. That wraps that up.